Thank you everyone for joining us. Before we begin, I'd like for us to take a moment to remember a visionary activist and thought leader who turned the narrative of women's empowerment in India. Kamla Bhasin was a close friend and colleague of Priya's, a jury member of the Martha Karar Award for Excellence in Women's Empowerment and Gender Equality, a renowned, respectable, and remarkable woman, a mentor and supporter for many of us working in this field. We lost her on the night of September 24th. Good afternoon and welcome to this very important conversation today on Unlearning Patriarchy, expanding the impacts of gender training. We have with us a wonderful panel of speakers. Welcome to all those who have joined us. We would love to hear from you as well. You are all on mute as we are in the webinar mode. Even though, do not hesitate to type in your questions in the chat and do not hesitate to share your emotions and comments freely. Our colleague Samiksha will make sure we read them and our panelists respond to them. The program is very tight. We have wonderful panelists with us. We want to hear them speak, but we do have space for question and answer at the end of every session. I'm also very happy today to share that Priya turns 40 early next year. It has been an exciting journey for us, and we have always considered ourselves as educators and facilitators, supporting individuals, organizations, and grassroots initiatives to learn, change, grow, and sustain themselves. Such support is not and has never been about financial support. It is support in the form of information sharing, in the form of ideas, in the form of linkage building, support through mediation, expertise, and even in emotional support. Priya's theory of change follows something unique, acting as a bridge between the supply and demand sides of any issues or themes we invest in. Efforts to mobilize individuals, especially the poor and marginalized sections, but increasingly also the middle class, makes them aware of their rights and responsibilities, thus fueling their sense of agency to demand services, inclusion, participation, and knowledge. On the supply side, we work with government and private agencies to sensitize them, to deliver their mandates and be accountable to citizens. We engage to put in place answers which are long-lasting and effective, rather than artificial short-term fix. We work with and not for. We can only present a slice of the work that we have done over these 40 years, but nevertheless, I shall attempt. Priya and its name, Participatory Research in Asia, owes its birth to the International Participatory Research Network as a main node to expand the nascent field of participatory research in the Asian subcontinent. The guiding principle for this period of Priya's history was promoting the right to learn. That is, making the process of learning available to everybody, irrespective of societal divisions. By the 1990s, Priya had established its Training for Trainers course to impart its participatory learning methodologies to grassroots activists, government trainers, and development professionals from different fields. The participatory training methodology included a specific focus on an experiential understanding gender in everyday life. The right to information for accountability and monitoring and demanding public services became essential. Priya's collaborative effort approach embraced not only institutions of governance, but other stakeholders. In 2004, Priya for the first time spoke of people's participation in urban townships, voicing the relevance of participatory planning in urban centers as much as in rural areas. The new millennium saw Priya sharpen its focus on gender. I am too old to read and write. I look after animals, home and fields, said a 30-year-old woman in rural Rajasthan in 1978. the Government of India launched its first National Adult Education Program in 1978, linking learning of literacy with awareness of entitlements. While building capacity of literacy structures and later in mid-1980s of state resource centers like Payantan in Bihar, it became clear to Priya that individual focus to hitherto ignored women does not motivate them to learn. They need a collective space and process for changing themselves. Priya developed training methodology and practical support to government and non-government efforts after the launch in India of the first separately designed national public program for women's development. It provided practical support to government officials, development workers, activists, and community members for the past 4 decades to understand gender and unlearn patriarchy. Responding to the emerging attention to women's work and income-generating programs for women, Priya's experiences demonstrated how deeply entrenched gender divisions of roles were in policymaking as well as society. Additionally, with the design of new income generation programs, added to considerable existing burden on women without altering their entrenched homemaking and livelihood responsibilities and their exploitation by middlemen. Building management capacities of women home-based workers to design their own project was necessary and doable, as Priya demonstrated through Women at Work in partnership with SEVA and ILO. Priya's studies in the 1980s began to highlight hazardous, low-paid, unskilled, and precarious employment of women workers in informal sectors of the economy like agriculture, construction, forestry, etc. Now, in order to support their organizations and agencies working with them, Priya began to advocate for their inclusion in development schemes. During the period of the 1980s, it became clear that merely adding a woman's component to existing development policy and program did not significantly improve women's condition of subordination in family and community. Focusing on gender relations entailed changing relationships of power entrenched in patriarchal mindsets and practices. From these experiences, Priya recognized the significance of supporting leadership, strengthening of women in communities, government frontline workers, and civil society. These capacity building programs focused on understanding gender relations at home, work, and community, and developed an experiential learning methodology that facilitated unlearning of socialized attitudes and norms. Seizing the opportunity created through constitutional mandates for panchayats and municipalities, Priya developed a nationwide program to support women's leadership in panchayats in the late 1990s. The perspective of women's leadership in governance translated into strengthening women's leadership as decision makers in public institutions of local governance. In order to provide support to elected women panchayat leaders, focused resource centers were set up to demonstrate value in creating separate learning and networking spaces and platforms for women. Nari networks, or women's networks, emerged to act in solidarity with elected women, including linkages with recently energized self-help groups. Women's leadership and governance gradually led to women's political assertion and leadership. Social justice committees of panchayats began to demand accountability for violence against women, especially of poor Dalit women, with Priya's extensive support on the ground. Preventing gender-based violence was brought to the agenda of governance institutions and their leadership at local, district, and state levels. Despite retaliatory violence against women's political leadership, not just in India, but in South Asia, solidarity with others working to prevent gender-based violence strengthened the movement of women's leadership in governance. 20 years ago, Priya decided to work with men and boys as well in preventing GBV and in promoting gender equality at home, in schools, communities, institutions, and workplaces. Priya's efforts in mainstreaming gender in the workplace go back to 1992, when it was invited to design and facilitate gender sensitization programs for officers and sailors of the Indian Navy. In the 1980s, Oxfam America's program in India and Bangladesh supported projects that focused on strengthening women's economic security and on increasing their social and political power. In 1986, a workshop was facilitated by Priya, which reviewed the progress and impact of the women-focused program to identify future directions to strengthen women's work in the informal sector in different regions. The outcomes paid attention to facilitating women's learning environment, trainers' behavior, and choice of context-appropriate methods. Participatory training sessions with grassroots rural women started in 1989. Using participatory methodology, women's groups learned to make decisions around the issues that emerged in the group discussions. Apart from direct training of rural women, field facilitators from other non-governmental organizations were also trained on the use of the methodology. The interlinked processes of organizing and learning with women were introduced in participatory community monitoring and evaluation at local levels. By the 1990s, it had become clear that participatory learning is useful in removing barriers between literate and illiterate, middle class and working class, professional and amateur groups. As economic roles of women were largely overlooked in government programs and policies, Priya created capacity building initiatives to strengthen abilities of ordinary, semi-literate women to increase their livelihood options, which are often constrained by lack of literacy skills. In 1999, the Women's Empowerment Through Literacy and Livelihood program addressed women's issues, gender roles, and the value of independent savings and credit groups. After the 73rd and 74th Amendments to the Constitution, there was difficulty in inducting women into the political arena and the threat of violence to women who decided to step into political leadership roles. Now, from the early 2000s, Priya scaled up with Women's Political Empowerment and Leadership Program to build women cadres at the local levels through sensitization trainings. Establishing links between women's leadership, education, and community empowerment requires sensitization of government officials and frontline workers on issues of violence against women, sexual harassment at workplace included. Gender training for frontline health workers, social justice committee members, and elected representatives result in strong grassroots local action to put gender on the table. The training based on organizational learning approaches focuses on formulating gender-sensitive mission and vision, setting up and training committees to address sexual harassment, and developing gender-sensitive HR policies. Priya's approach to changing gender relations and ending violence against women include building capacities in boys and men to question SRQ, #SRQ, or asking #why but, their own attitudes and those in families and communities that condone patriarchal behaviors and structures. Such capacity to question is also raised among girls and women because many forms of gender discrimination, violence, and harassment are so frequent and so internalized as ordinary that girls themselves fail to challenge or question them many times. Priya's Kadam Badhate Chalo program specifically works with adolescent boys and girls. The training sensitizes adolescents about differences between gender and sex, the gender roles, helping them identify the root causes of violence against women and girls, focused on understanding socialization and the systemic nature of patriarchy. The methodology particularly recognizes that young boys and young girls working together are the important change agents in creating a more democratic and safe environment for women and girls. The use of drama, poetry, and song, as well as sports, stimulates learning among peers. The youth also learn participatory safety assessment techniques, which they use extensively to identify safe and unsafe spaces within their community, college, and universities and high schools. In the past couple of years, gender trainings with adolescents have begun to include conversations on multiple gender identities, going beyond the traditional gender binary. Now, what have been the results of our work as a knowledge institution, emphasizing learning and use of knowledge as a vehicle for change? Going beyond the numbers that you see on the screen, the impact of our work is found in removing obstacles, both personal and systemic, valuing knowledge amplifying voice, the dreams, the hopes, the frustrations, pains of the hitherto excluded, authentic, contextual, locally rooted voice based on experience and knowledge, making democracy for all. The ongoing pandemic has exposed the governance, planning, and participation deficits in India and around the world, special focus on gender here. Female force participation has further declined to below 20% in India during the pandemic. Violence against girls and women has increased several-fold. Women continue to stay stuck in low-paid, low-status, hazardous, precarious, and temporary jobs with restricted and limited livelihood options. Underage marriage of girls and honor killing has increased, and online education tools, skills, and platforms continue to discriminate against girls and women. While understanding of gender relations has begun to extend beyond the binary of man and the woman, institutional cultures continue to discriminate and reinforce gender inequality. Priya's commitment to gender equality and gender justice needs to be refreshed in the present, learning from his journey of 40 years. Several issues and strategies require further understanding and exploration. What methods and processes are influencing learning about gender relations, identity, and equality? What strategies and coalitions can support scaling up of gender training in development programming and agencies? Through which approaches gender and governance can become everyday practice? How can feminist leadership be strengthened in all types of societal institutions, public and private? How can cultural practices, systems, and procedures be transformed for effective gender mainstreaming institutionally? These conversations have been designed to answer these questions, and most importantly, they are about refreshing relationships in a new era. A reminder of the history of struggles with our fellow travelers in India, in the region, and globally, and strengthening the movement to build a knowledge democracy and to help reimagine our world of tomorrow today. This conversation has been designed and facilitated in partnership with Martha Farrell Foundation, UN Women India, and CYST in Orissa. Welcome everybody, and I would like to begin now. With that, I would like to invite our first panelist and partners in holding this discussion, Jagdananda Ji, who is the Member Secretary of CYST, and Upali Mohanty, the Program Manager and Gender Focal Point, also from CYST, join us from Odisha, India. We are keen to hear from you, Jagdaji, on some of the key lessons that can be drawn from your experience in gender training and to your present work as a tool for mitigating gender-based violence through community engagement. Welcome, Jagdaji.
Thank you, Nandita, for a brilliant introduction about the huge journey through which Priya and many of us have gone through. So congratulations, Priya. Compliments Rajesh Bhai for 40 years of time. It's not a small time. We are also going to complete 40 years next year. So we know what a difficult it is to run an institution over 40 years and what are the pains and gains. Thank you very much. You know, I think I'm delighted to be part of this conversation. And you know, the gender journey in CYST began in 2000. And to be very honest, you know, it started with our donors' request actually. You know, the donor, it was a donor-led, gender sensitization program. We started in 2000. And then slowly we got into a complete different framework at two levels. And organizational level, we had to really figure out a gender policy for our funding. So, and let me be honest and frank about it. We had to really push our staff and volunteers to go through a gender training for developing a shared understanding on gender concerns. And then at the organizational level, we had to finalize a new lens to look at issues and develop sensitivity towards gender issues. That was the kind of, at the organizational level, preparation. At the programmatic level, we started looking at how we mainstream gender. That means in every piece of our work, we have to develop a kind of programmatic framework, especially participatory governance, education, which was a very big program at that point of time, and then rural livelihoods, especially in the tribal areas. And in each policy, we had very clear what you call mandate, how we would like to embrace gender concerns in our programmatic ways. And then I will tell you what has been my experience. By narrating this, the journey of CYST, I'm trying to share what has been our, what you call effort, and a sincere effort to go through a gender lens in our organization. We got involved in a series of capacity building programs, especially on gender, and especially our work with the local government, gender sensitive Gram Panchayat development planning. Gram Panchayat is, for those, it's a local government in the rural areas. And to make the local government's development planning at the village level through a gender lens was a very interesting assignment which came on us. And we really very happily did that in not only in 1-2 villages, more than 400 villages. We started embarking on special leadership development program with tribal women leaders, because we thought if we want to do some affirmative action on the ground, leadership development is extremely important. Then we started working with the state on gender responsive budgeting and did a lot of training with government functionaries at that level. Then in the recent past, we got involved. Now I am very happy that Anita is also there from Azad Foundation. And I also see Siko in the panel from ICNet Japan. Along with Anita's Azad Foundation, we embarked on a very interesting journey of training women on wheels. The program was Women on Wheels, driving training for women actually. And driving training for women was very, very carefully crafted to challenge the gender stereotype. How do you really bring a new culture in the roads? How do you bring a new confidence in the eyes? And I have seen, along with women also, a lot of third gender also joined, especially, and they were excited actually. Then finally, along with some others, when we looked at the women's literacy in computer, internet literacy of women, we were appalled to see that Odisha is not doing well, the province where I come from. So we got into a huge digital literacy program through a program where we promoted Gram Sathinis actually, especially women, and through internet training, how do they really access the knowledge world which is lying outside them? How do they access skills actually? So this is, and then now of late, we have during the COVID, we have got into the gender-based violence and the sexual harassment which is going on through a very special program with ICNet, and Upali is going to share on that. I don't want to, elaborate on that because of brevity of time. Let me tell you what has been our experience actually. Our experience, Upali, you can keep the slide. Yes. When your turn comes, you can explain that. From our experience of all that, whatever I said in the beginning, you see, patriarchy is the structural and ideological system that perpetuates the privileges of masculinity. That is the issue. And gender training helps people to be aware of the norms and beliefs which sustains patriarchy. It has been able to create awareness to some extent within women, men, girls, and boys. However, the training has been very limited in creating change in ideologies, belief, values, norms that perpetuate patriarchy through different institutions. Training is very simple actually. People's behavior, attitude established through a hegemonic system over many years. And then expecting a change in a 3 days or 4 days training, it's not possible actually. So it's only start of a reflection process. I think, therefore, the training itself is not a panacea to change the situation on the ground. That is what, we got to know, and from out of our own reflection. One can only start the reflection within participants during a training program. And that is the starting of a journey. To bring more impact through gender training in latter stage, probably we need to focus on transformative gender training, experiential training that contributes to self-awareness and transformation within men and women, and a motivation to change, actually. In my opinion, more gender transformative action is needed on the ground. And these changes need to be from family, community, and within our institutions and beyond. If this is the case, I have seen a big movement is necessary from training to mentoring, actually. And between training, the kind of back-end support which is necessary for the training, we could not afford to do that. And now, of course, at this stage, it is becoming very difficult to really plan and organize our resources to do that. And without that, I think training is a very incomplete, what you call strategy. Training is a very incomplete tool to bring transformative change in the society. With this, let me request Upali to share her experience of our COVID response program, which is a sexually gender-based violence for which my state, Odisha's list is at the top, actually. And there are three tribal districts where this situation is very acute as per the National Crime Control Record Bureau. So therefore, in collaboration with ICNet, we have embarked on a program to create what you call SGBB, what you call champions in those villages. Over to you, Upali.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. I will share CYSD experience of gender training program during this COVID-19. During this COVID-19 ongoing pandemic, CYSD work on SGBB in 3 districts. Those are the 3 tribal dominated districts, as Shah said. The objective was to decline the SGBB cases through community engagement. For this, actually, to understand the ground reality, we have done a situational analysis where the issues came like what hampers the safety and dignity of women. So what we found that the violence on women has been perennial, and it has increased during this COVID-19 pandemic many folds. The reason is like the increase in instability, economic activity, alcoholism. The manfolk took their anger actually and the frustration on women by inflicting violence on them. But the violence against women is, as I said, that it is perennial. The reason are something different, like the societal norms, gender stereotype, lack of community structure to address SGBB. These are some of the reasons where the women are facing violence. So with this background, we plan to have this program, and we have a series of gender sensitive orientation program to address this SGBB. Our target groups were community level cadres, which includes both male and female, village leaders, SAGs, ANM and Anganwadi workers. Those are frontline workers who are supposed to provide support in preventing SGBB cases and necessary assistance to these SGBB survivors. But before going ahead, it was equally important to equip our staff and build their perspective on gender sensitivity, like the sexual and gender-based violence. So we conduct series of TOT for them. Further, they oriented this SGBB warriors. So there were intensive training workshop program for this SGBB warrior. We have trained 360 warriors. Those includes frontline workers. They were properly educated about the nature and type of violence, gender stereotype, gender norms, their role and responsibility regarding case identification, case recording, case resolution, and linkage with appropriate institution. Further, this warrior, again, they educated the SAG peers groups, adolescents, girls in their community. The idea behind this was to revamp the community structure to prevent and responsive toward SGBV. So our learnings, I would like to share our learnings. So from this, we found that there was a need of counseling and mentoring to this SGBV warrior. As we see that SGBV survivors, they lost social, their social loss is very high. Yes.
Sorry, one more minute.
Yes, I'll complete it. And they are not getting any support from their family and communities. Immediate counseling and mentoring is highly required to this survivor. So we see that, and we connected this survivor with the counselor event. So again, if we see that empathetically, we are working with the frontline workers. As during this COVID-19, they played a very crucial role, and they belong to this community, and they are close to every and each household. So what we see that there is no such government programs, orientation program and awareness program, and particularly on gender to this frontline, for these frontline workers. And third, it is known fact that we need to orient male on gender, as they play a very important role in gender mainstreaming. So another findings was that our learning that we should that should be integration of gender orientation to the community platform, like we have SAG, GKS, VHND, PRI, and in this process, in there we should include gender awareness. We should do gender awareness for these platforms. And what again, one point I would like to see share, and I will end with here, like the capacity building, we need to refinement the support system which are existing in place, like the one-stop center, CDPO, Mahilans, Sishu Dex. They need refinement in their capacity. So they are lacking capacity for which they are not able to reach to the community, and community are not able to reach to them. So with this, I would like to stop. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Opali. Thank you so much, Jagdaji. Thank you so much for your partnership as well for this, to have this conversation. Jagdaji, he talked about how difficult the journey was, and the biggest difficulty was within the organization itself. He says trainings are not a panacea for change; it is just the beginning of a journey. Wonderful words. Thank you so much, Jagdaji, and so true. 19 women from Pakistan. Before I introduce my our next speaker, just a small story. 19 women from Pakistan, Philippines, Bangladesh, Nepal, and India met in Surajkund, New Delhi, India, for a 3-day workshop in 1996. They met to discuss the findings of a study that was conducted by Vasant, who is a feminist writer, activist, and gender trainer, on the request of ASPE. Apart from discussing the findings of the report, the workshop also emphasized the need to build a South Asia perspective in gender trainings. The workshop was facilitated by Kamladi, representing FAO NGO South Asia program, and Sunita Menon, who was then ASPE's South Asia facilitator on women's education for empowerment. They met, these women met to try to reach a consensus on an agenda for the future. It's a fascinating report. The link is going to be shared in the chat by Nitya, my colleague, and as she has been sharing all along. And with that, I'm so happy to now invite our second speaker for today, Ms. Nani Zulmani, who is now the current president of ASPE. Nani, we would like to hear from you. How have approaches to gender training programs evolved in the last 3 decades in Indonesia? And what lessons can be drawn from their impacts?
Thank you, Nandita. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. First of all, I would like to congratulate Priya for its 40th anniversary next year, right? It's a great honor to be invited in this very important and timely critical conversations on unlearning patriarchy, approaches to gender training. So I think I would like to respond to Nandita questions from different and from deep reflections on what we have been achieved through this gender training in relation to the visions of our movement. So last year, 2020, we celebrate the 25 years of Beijing Declarations and Platform for Actions for Gender Equality. Yes, we make some progress, such as there are around 274 legal products and framework made in 131 countries in favor to women. And we have more girls are in schools now than ever, particularly in basics educations. And also maternal mortality has fallen to 38%, although it is still high in number and also varies in different countries. However, if you look at this data, the report, actually we don't move much in some part, particularly in relations to economic well-being and role of women in decision-making at all levels. So the gender gap in labor participations do not change in the past 20 years. It's still at around 31% points, and women paid less, 16%, than men still occurs like 25 years ago. So and what almost does not change at all in the past 25 years is the divisions of labor at household level, where women do unpaid care work and domestic responsibility 3 times than men. Like women spend 4.1 hours compared to men only 1.7 hours. And women in politics remain stagnant at only 1 woman in every 4 political leaders. I think Priya's data that has been presented by Nandita also saw this, right? So as the consequences, women and girls are still the poorest of the poor in many countries, become victims of different type of violence, marginalized and discriminated behavior, tradition, and even law. Yeah. So what this data and lived reality tell us? This is, I have been, so disturbed from looking at this data because it has been decades, right? We are doing gender training, advocate, and do many things. Even ASBA is very strong in terms of integrating gender policy in the organization, within the organization. I think one of the network that's really consistent on this is ASBA. So after so many efforts have been done to make structural changes on gender and power relations, there are still some fundamental things that not change the gender relations at family level and private life. Not so much change. I think Jagananda also mentioned this, and Nandita, I think resonate to this as well. And we also, this is deep reflection, right? Then we learn so much that a policy change that does not necessarily change women's life to better, does not necessarily change the gender relations. For example, in the past 25 years, many countries successfully passed the domestic violence law to legally protect women from domestic violence. But domestic violence remaining there and even worse now. So it's not really changed the behavior of this. And then our further question is what has been missing, or what is the gap in the agenda of women's rights movement and gender and development from maybe the 90s. I remember my first gender training is 1980s, 1987, something like that, on gender awareness, and then gender awareness, gender analysis, different type of gender tools. So based on long reflection and also intensive work in this, particularly my last 20 years, building women-headed family movement in Indonesia. One of the gaps that we identify is in the family. So most of our work on gender not really touch the heart of this family, where actually the process of construction gender relations happen. So most of the work with family very much focusing more on access to resources or access to training, capacity building, and other things in the development framework, but not really exercising gender and power relation within the family. So I'm very happy and recognize Priya has been doing this. Also, Jandanda as well as share that there are a lot of efforts has been done as well at the family level, but it's not as structured as the development, gender and development, right? So while in many cultures like us in Asia, particularly, family is the main, the heart, core, the heart and the main space where value system, gender and power relation is introduced and constructed from the early stage of children. So some institutions which tend to conserve the traditional values of gender relation and practice, like religions, cultures, then occupy this space, this arena, by enforcing their patriarchy ideology that embedded in their religious interpretations or indigenous tradition and practice that tend to discriminate women and conserve the inequality gender relations. So power over relations is is validated, with all this value system where they interpret using gender. So how should we respond to this fact and reality? So our proposal is to really occupy the family space for exercising gender relations.
Nani, I'll have to ask you to cut short. 1 minute more.
Yes, 1 minute more. Yeah, empowering parents to practice change making, and then parenting where children from the early age being trained on this, sensitivity. And then how then family create the environment where children can grow and develop new system values. So we rely on the next generation rather than we are now. So some principle on that, of course, how can we enforce the feminist perspective, which look at women's life experience as source of knowledge, and then use popular education, critical thinking, and analyzing the context and focus on power relation transformations as the part of this process. And also, of course, the lifelong learning process, intergenerations, and then how learning for action, learning to live together, and other things enforced in this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nani. Such an important thing. She talked about attacking. She talked about attacking that value system, which we take so much for granted. How do we structure our trainings to really address changing of gender relations, which have not changed in spite of so many changes in laws and trainings, the family relations within the home. Thank you, Nani, for that. One of the closing, quotes from the report that we talked about a little earlier, they talked about how, analyzing differences in greater depth in trainings. Azad Foundation has so bravely taken this on head on with their Women with Wheels program. I am so happy now to invite Anita Mathur from Azad Foundation to share with us lessons from its approaches to capacity building on gender, particularly around your work, Anita, with the Women in Wheels program. Welcome, Anita. Thank you so much for being with us. Over to you. We have about 7 minutes to finish your presentation. I hope that's enough.
Yeah.
And there's so much to talk, but we hope that this is just the beginning of a longer conversation.
Right.
Thanks, Anita.
Thank you very much, and congratulations to Priya for completing 40 years. My association with Priya also goes back to almost 37 years. And I've been trained in participatory training methodology. Rather, I was introduced to this methodology by Dr. Rajesh Tandon. And we are still practicing and learning and so on. So I'll just share, I'll concentrate on this, the learning from Azad Foundation. I'll share about the Azad Foundation trainings briefly. I'll share about Azad vision, which is a vision of a world where all women, in particular women from underprivileged backgrounds, enjoy full citizenship, earn a livelihood with dignity, and generate wealth and value for all. Our mission is to equip resource-poor women such that they are able to empower themselves with knowledge and skills to earn a livelihood with dignity in jobs and markets that had traditionally been close to them. So we work in the non-traditional livelihood. Yeah, you can keep moving if. We use the framework which we call it gender just skill education framework, where we engage with marginalized communities. We transform them right-based and technical skills through these trainings, and we employ them in decent remunerative livelihoods. And to retain them, we also create gender-sensitive markets where women can sustain these jobs. What we mean by a gender justice skill education framework is that these are the factors that affects women's access to information. These are the also affect their relationship, and they need support to negotiate within their own families. And also there is a huge unpaid care work that needs to be negotiated when they go for job, and counselings to handle gender, social, cultural norms that impact their access. The pedagogy and the contents of these trainings are not just providing information or technical education, but based on the empowerment. Need to also engage with them, because when they go through these trainings, they also identify their own barriers and they want to take action. So therefore, we need to engage with them regularly. We support them to gain employability for livelihoods with dignity, and advocacy for a supportive ecosystem which facilitate their retention in the market. So this is the overall framework that we use for all our training, and of course gender training is one of the main components in it. Our trainings are very transformative, though we are into livelihood, but our trainings are very transformative, building from technical skills training. It also has a big component of self-development and women empowerment. So these three actually form the capacity building training that we empower, through which we empower women, who then are placed in the livelihood market. So for example, the technical training would of course be all relevant to the driving, which is the current livelihood options that we have. But in terms of the self-development, they will be introduced to the communication skills, communicating with family, communicating with within the society, and also at the state level, work readiness, personal counseling, English speaking. As well, the gender patriarchy and violence against women. A lot of women who join our programs are actually single women, or also they are victim of violence. There is also training on legal rights, sexuality and reproductive health, self-defense and first aid, etc. So this is component of all three together. That is what actually is giving us transformation. So this is a very, very, interwoven aspects of the training. Now, all the training, as Mr. Jagdanand also says, that it has to build on the experience of the people. So our approach is also experience based training, where listening and empathy built in the understanding of the diverse realities of the participants, of the people, of the society. The approach is also very collaborative. It's a very collaborative learning environment. Their traditional hierarchy between a learner is scripted, and learning environment created that builds values for equality, safety, and respect for diversity. The training, as also said earlier, has to be transformative in nature. Where we have sessions that allows deep questioning and reflection upon social norms, values, practices, and help participants to recognize their own barriers and within their own lives and think about the change, how they can transform, how they can change the situation and in their own lives. It is also an intersectional approach which implies working across binaries and diversities. We also include sessions on men and masculinities. It is important to reflect upon socialization of a girl and a boy, power and privileges with sensitivity within society that exists. And therefore, our work is not just with women, but also with young girls and young boys in the community. If I reflect on our own experience, the practice of learning, action, reflection, learning is the key to change the mindset and bring the new system in the family and the society. We have seen this is happening. The process of transformative trainings are undertaken with young boys, girls, and women, not just with women, because in the beginning of when we started working on gender equality, we were focusing more on women. But it is equally important, as I also said earlier, that to work with boys for equality, it is non-negotiable. One must be working with men because they have to change their attitudes. It is also an ongoing process. It is not one time. It is an ongoing process. For us, it is 6 months to a year process. Young women, girls and boys understand gender division of labor in different trainings, gender norms, access and control over resources, benefits, and decision making, and challenge the stereotypes thinking and they become role model in the communities. Women are also prepared to earn livelihood with dignity, deals with all forms of violence. They increase their access and control over productive resources and able to develop their own agency. The boys in the communities get ready to take up unpaid care work. Now we have many boys who are actually doing household work and action against gender-based violence, because they need to also be involved in taking action against gender-based violence. They also support and promote girls with higher education, because in most Indian society, as we see in most families, boys' voice is heard. So if they support girls' education, there are more chances of girls getting into higher education. They also support non-traditional livelihood for women in the communities. So therefore, they encourage women to join non-traditional livelihood that Azad offers to them.
Thank you.
Next, please.
How many more slides? Last one?
Can you change the slide? Yeah.
We just have 1 minute more.
Yeah, this is the last one. Yes. The young boys, girls, women understand and respect different sexuality, as it is very important in the current time. They also voice for their own and others' rights. Once in 2 months, women discuss and write stories of their own empowerment in our system. They write about their own journey. And these stories are shared among themselves as well as different groups of boys and girls and other platforms. Now we see many girls from our area take an admission in ITIs. These are the first timers going to ITIs courses, polytechnic courses, and also going for regular graduation program. There are opposing early marriages. The women have access and control. In some cases, they are the primary bread earners. They are the decision makers. Many are the made taking legal actions in their own cases of violence. So these are the result of the training that they go through, with us for a period of time. So in my opinion, next please, it has to be ongoing and we need to engage with them on the action that they wants to take it up, because otherwise, whatever is the outcome of the training, we need to support them. This is, as also said earlier, this is only the beginning of the journey of transformation. It is not the end by itself. So therefore, it has to be looked at from a holistic point of view. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anita ji. That was such a wonderful presentation. Is it all right if we share it with anybody who wants to see it later? Okay. So Anita ji, while she talked about gender sensitive markets, she also talks about how the pedagogy of training should be to empower, to empower. So before I go onto our next panelist, I just want to share a small story. Last few weeks ago, I was conducting a training for trainers on gender-based violence, and I met a panchayat member at this training, and he was nominated because he had the best panchayat for achieving goals for women's empowerment and gender. He even had an internal committee for prevention of sexual harassment in his panchayat. That's the first. I've not heard of that anywhere else. But during the training, he asked me, if I now, after this training, go back and I begin making such a big deal for all the small things that we have talked about today, what will people in my panchayat say to me? So obviously he had not understood why. He had done such wonderful things. He won an award, but why had he done it? That was really not clear for him. We are really happy here today that among our panelists, we have Dr. Yogesh Kumar, who's the executive director and founder of Samarthan. He has many years of working with panchayats. And we want to know from you, Yogesh Bhai, all the lessons that we can draw from all the experiences that you have had in conducting gender trainings in the few decades, but most importantly, how you used some of those experiences to inform your recent project, which is a fascinating project. We just talked about how gender-based violence increased during COVID, and Samarthan currently is implementing a very fascinating program on addressing gender-based violence in panchayats and talking about safe panchayats. So over to you, Yogesh Bhai. You have 7 minutes. We would love to hear you for more, but for now, 7 minutes.
Thank you, Nandita. Thanks a lot. And and congratulations, Priya, for the 40 years of meaningful, impactful journey. And I'm privileged to be part of it over the last 25 years, personally, as well as Samarthan as a family of Priya. So I'll move ahead because we have limited time, and we will continue to celebrate 40 years in other platforms. Basically, I would like to focus on two areas where we have developed capacities. One at the institutional level, where we are trying to work with the SIRD, State Institute of Rural Development, which is a training institution for the Panchayati Raj institutions across the state, and they have a faculty of more than 40 people within their different setups, and how they can be trainers on the gender-based violence and value for women related issues, and how it can be integrated in panchayats. And secondly, directly our experiences with the panchayats and women's group of conducting such trainings, and what have been the changes and what the methodologies have been used in that. We believe that gender governance and local governance have quite a lot of overlap, and therefore panchayats have an important role to play in building their panchayats women friendly, gender sensitive, gender equal, and therefore we work with panchayats as an institution. Over the last 3 years, with our experience of UNFPA supported program at the state level, we conducted training of about 40 faculties, members of SIRD, online. And the experience of online is, and especially when you're dealing with such complex, stereotypical kind of mindsets, very difficult to change in person, where the processes cannot happen. It was a big challenge. But somehow what we did, we created right kind of films, blended with some of the films on which discussion can take place, right kind of PowerPoint presentations. And because once you give these kind of inputs, and then people get troubled, they start reflecting, and therefore they need to vent out various feelings that they have. And therefore, we created a WhatsApp group. And therefore, on these WhatsApp group, people were writing all kind of messages, good and bad, and their own reflections. And people were responding. So it became a kind of a platform where a lot of discussion was taking place. So one of the challenges in COVID-like situation where many of the trainings are going to be virtual, that how do we blend various participatory techniques and various technological platforms that can help people to connect as much as they connect in person trainings. The second was that soon after we did that, and it was important that they must practice what they have learned in these 3 days TOT, was basically to help them conduct trainings for their block level resource persons. So 450 block level resource persons were trained by them online by their faculty, so they could hone their own skills of using Zoom platforms and developing small videos. And so interesting thing happened in that. Recently, Nandita mentioned about it, we conducted a training of trainers where it was in person. There were panchayat representatives, representatives from SIRD faculty, and also some of the civil society organizations representatives were there. So it was a mixed group, and we really enjoyed this training in a way because, and there are many lessons. I think, Nandita, you please join in supporting some of the experiences that I'm telling. One of the experience was that because of the mixed group, some of them were extremely senior members of SIRD in the age group of about 55 and 60, about to retire. And whereas some very young NGO workers, young elected women representatives with vision and strong leadership. So it created a kind of a cosmos where the group itself was able to deal with various kind of issues of patriarchy, masculinity. They were challenging each other. So that was, we realized that mixed groups are an advantage, though they delay sometimes the way you want to take the group forward. They bring you backward after second day's questions, which you thought have been resolved. And such people will ask those questions and you are back to square one. But it is important that the group challenges that. So I'll not give the illustrations, we have limited time. The second is the mixed group of trainers is also very helpful, because Nandita, myself, and a couple of others were able to complement each other. From a man's perspective, challenging women, and from women's perspective, challenging men was very useful. So it was reinforcing in a way. And especially when we are on the same plane and same wavelength, then it becomes very easier. So that helps a lot. And the third was that we have realized that training without a hand-holding support will be meaningless. I think Jagda has also emphasized on it. This 3 days training would not result into anything unless people go back and practice these training methodologies that they have used, learned, the subject matter they have learned. Otherwise, it will become meaningless and they will go back to the same grooves where they are. So our realization was that it is important that when we are designing such trainings, we have to have a complete backup plan, and there should be resource persons responsible to see that hand-holding support is provided so that all the trainers can continue to do that. This is what we could do in the first round of training, where they had to train 400 master trainers. So that was very helpful in that. Now, the three components of any training where there is a behavioral change you expect, that is the most crucial part. The knowledge, delivery of knowledge, which is simpler, that is we can do. And then the third is the skill building. So skill building in 3 days TOT becomes very, very difficult. We have to have at least 5 days time where they also practice and we can give them feedback. But the behavioral change is an important area. I've realized that many of the people as trainers who are gender blind or have such stereotypical thinking are more dangerous as trainers. And therefore, they need to be questioned, they need to be sensitized, and therefore, we need a large number of cadre of trainers on gender-based violence issues, gender equality issues, who can sensitize the trainers, irrespective of where they work, whether in the sector of health, education, Manrega, because unless they are sensitive and they are gender blind, they are going to be a problem. So I think we need to have a cadre of a large number of trainers who can provide support on behavioral change issues. Now, let me come back to my grassroots experience, where we have trained about 300 panchayat representatives. I have 1 minute. Oh, sorry, just 1 minute. So I'll quickly close that. So I've realized the two things. One is self-help groups have become a very established platforms where women meet and their comfort level is very high. And we have seen that they challenge the stereotypes, the patriarchy in those areas, and then they come to panchayats in a more prepared manner. So that is one. The second is we have broken down these structured trainings into 1.5 hours session that will happen every month when their meeting of the SHGs will happen. And there are sequences, and these sequences are in such a manner that they get some content, they discuss whatever was the content of the previous month and what actions they have taken, and then they will design some action for the next meeting. And facilitators' guides have been prepared. So two types, one especially with the women, the other with the panchayat elected representatives, where the women elected representatives and men will sit together and they will do it. As a result, in large number of panchayats, safety audits have been conducted. The 40 deserted women who were living with their parents because nobody was negotiating, panchayats decided to negotiate. They said it is not a personal matter, it is the matter of the panchayat. And therefore, they brought both the families to come together and they negotiated. They started using the one-stop center services whenever they had difficulty. So breaking boundaries and making people understand these are not personal issues, these are public issues, governance issues, is extremely important, and we need to invest on a long-term basis on that. Thank you, Nandita, and please add if you have anything to say.
Thank you so much, Yogesh Bhai. The story was not from the training we did together. It was another training after that. But the training that we did together was really wonderful because after a long time we did it in person and we'd forgotten what small group discussions were like, writing on chart paper and sticking them up on the walls. So thank you so much, Yogesh Bhai, for organizing that and having me there as well. Such wonderful points Yogesh Bhai has talked about. He's talked about how we've gone online now, and I think later on we will also be discussing that when Abhilasha comes in from UN Women to say, what will training look like? What will the strategies and approaches to training online look like? That's going to be a reality for us going forward. So thank you, Yogesh Bhai, for that. And our next guest speaker is represents a multidisciplinary development firm from Japan, which provides consulting services, including gender and training, globally. And Shioko herself leads several of the programs on gender, and we are very keen to hear from you, Shioko, lessons from your work in gender training to promote gender positivity and equality in the region. Over to you, Shioko.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Nandita, and congratulations for the 40 years anniversary. Let me share some slides. Okay, hello, I'm Shioko Momose, a consultant from a Japanese consultancy firm. I am here because we are in partnership with CYSD in implementing SGBB project funded by JICA. So let me start from introducing the Gggi profile of Japan so that you can have an idea where I'm coming from. As you can see, Japan ranks very low in Gggi. The worst is women's participation in politics, which tells you that even the education and health level is near to gender equality. It doesn't automatically transform to leadership, as you can see with politics, which we rank 147 among 156 countries. So I wanted to answer the question, what lessons can be drawn from past approaches to gender training based on my surroundings? Let me explain about my company I belong to. Our company, ICNet, is a consultancy firm with a strong expertise in international development, founded in 1993. We have 178 employees, women 90, men 88, which a bit more than half are women. However, women in management level is 38%. And in 1993, when the company started, there were 2 gender consultants. As of today, there are 20. And major clients in the area of researches and projects in the field of gender for our company is Japan International Cooperation Agency, JICA, and Bureau of Gender Equality of the Cabinet Office in Japan. As consultancy firm from a low Gggi ranked country working on development project overseas, we do not want to spread gender inequality overseas. So the company also tries to foster gender equality within the company and support managers running overseas projects to wear glasses with gender lens, even though the project doesn't focus on gender. So our company promotes all staff members to participate in gender training held by organizations such as JICA, National Women Education Center, and various NGOs in Japan. The company holds gender training such as unconscious bias and protection from sexual exploitation, abuse, and sexual harassment, so that we can also protect from these abuses in the main office and our overseas project offices as well. Our company has a post of gender advisor within the company that provides technical advices to mainstream gender within the company and project overseas. We have a mailing list called Gender Group, where the staff members can consult anything regarding gender. The group provides mentorship to the staff when needed. Number of staff in the gender group is 47 and 25% are men. So let me explain what we do regarding managing gender projects overseas. Annually, we conduct about 3 gender projects overseas, which is combined with economic empowerment, agriculture, health, and education. We also conduct about 3 researches and various trainings in Japan. When ICNet conducts gender project overseas, we try to touch upon these 3 aspects, which is agency relation structures, because we aim in women's empowerment and gender equality. However, our experiences show that trainings are effective in enhancing agency and relations. However, changing the structure has been a challenge only by doing training. This is our recent experience, and now let me present about training we did together with an NGO in Nepal recently to prevent girls from dropping out due to pandemic. The project focused on developing radio programs and monitoring systems of study groups composed by boys and girls so that they can continue their studies while the school closure. Through this project, we incorporated gender training to teachers and girls and boys. This case was one of the gender trainings we did within the project that bore fruit, which was gender training targeting teachers. After the workshop, the participants, here teachers, started mixed bench seating in classrooms so that girls can sit in front rows and discuss with their male peers. Female teachers, together with students, initiated workshop on menstruation and hygiene management and sexual and gender-based violence, developed an environment that girls can receive sanitary napkins without feeling shame, established complaint system of sexual gender-based violence in schools where girls could report and get protection. Key points of success was that the problem to be solved was clear and that the teachers had a common understanding of the causes of the problem. field officers followed up so that the teachers could take feasible action, and the teachers involved parents and shared their understandings regarding the consequences of the dropout. Another one, Country X. Country X is not India, by the way. We did a workshop on strengthening the capacity of district committees members to prevent violence against women. And after the workshop, participants were not ready to take any actions by themselves, but suggested that they needed to educate the community on legal issues related to violence against women and children. So reason for failure was that though the problem to be solved was clear, there was no clear understanding of the causes of the problem among the participants. And the discussion and the training were dominated by those who blamed the woman's impatience as cause of violence. So, so we have learned that, I mean, it's a matter of course, but we assumed that because they were members of Committee of Prevention of Violence Against Women, we thought they had a common understanding, but it wasn't. And I think as a trainer, we didn't really study the local context, and we weren't able to study well about the background of participants, because we couldn't address that gender inequality or patriarchy is the root cause of violence against women. So going back to the question, what lessons can be drawn from past approaches to gender training? Trainings are effective to empower agency and can be a force to change relation. It is ideal if it links to creation or improvement in structure. However, training itself may not bring drastic changes in structure to realize gender equality. But having said that, the following are components for successful gender training. Our training content must be tailored to the local context where everyone is clear about the issue. Trainers need to do the groundwork on how to effectively unlearn patriarchy, which is rooted in the lives of the people. Training should be practical that can turn into action. Training should be followed up by experts or peers until tangible results are seen. And it is important to foster a sense of team among participants during the training so that they can mentor each other even after the training. And I want to conclude my presentation by saying that I think the others also said that one-time training doesn't bear fruit. The participant should be followed up or mentored by experts or peers in order to achieve changes that contribute to gender equality. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yoko. Thank you so much. Very, very important points you have raised, and talking about inward looking and wearing the gender lens. Thank you so much. And I think Yogesh Bhai also talked about how the gender trainer themselves need to have the gender lens. So thank you so much. It is my absolute honor and pleasure now to welcome Sunita Menon, who is the Senior Director from Breakthrough. We cannot speak about Breakthrough and not mention their Man Ke Manjeere and Bell Bajao, Ring the Bell campaigns to address patriarchy and domestic violence. In fact, all of their campaigns. Sunita, we are so happy to have you with us today. We are keen to hear from you what lessons can be drawn from Breakthrough's path-breaking work in leveraging media and new media to influence behaviors and attitudes towards gender. She will be speaking about one of their award-winning programs with adolescents and youth. Over to you, Sunita.
Hi there.
Hi, Sunita. Thanks so much.
Here, and really congratulations to Priya on 40 years of impactful work. I don't have a presentation, so I'll be speaking impromptu. So yeah, I'm Sunita Menon and I represent Breakthrough. We are a rights-based organization working to end violence against women and girls, and we've been doing that for 2 decades now. And in fact, all our campaigns and work, including trainings, revolve around gender. So there's lots to talk about. But I'll be speaking about one specific program called Taro Ki Toli, which is a gender equity program in schools. So as you all know that Breakthrough has been working on intersectional violence against women issues, and we've done massive campaigns and on-the-ground program around domestic violence and early marriage and gender biased sex selection and sexual harassment at workplace and in public place. And while we were working on all of these issues, one common thematic which was running around all of these issues was it was intersectional, it was interconnected, and the connecting piece was patriarchy and gender-based discrimination. So we thought that if you really want to make a difference and if you want to have deep-rooted change, we need to start young. And we need to start working with people, especially adolescents, who are still at a stage where they are malleable, they're forming their thought processes. And therefore, if you start young, you'll be able to kind of incorporate changes into their lives. So it was at that time that we decided to start working in Haryana. And Haryana at that time, when we started the program, had skewed sex ratio of 830 to 1,000 boys. And there was massive trafficking of girls from Jharkhand, where we were running the early marriage program. And the girls were being trafficked to Haryana and being sold off to men to be married and be abused by them. So it was in such a context that we started the gender equity program in schools, because we thought that it's only when you build the value of a girl child and when you build equitable relation between boys and girls that a real change would happen. So this program we tried and tested in 150 schools over a 2-year period with some 18,000 students. It was a partnership between Breakthrough, JPAL, and Haryana government. And the 2-year program, I mean, a lot of people have said that, 3-day workshops doesn't work. I agree with all of you that you need to invest in long-term programs on gender equitable trainings. Only then will you start seeing the difference. So over a 2-year period, we tried and tested the 150 with 18,000 students, a gender equity program, where the students went through a journey of me to we, starting from psychosocial skills about building self-worth, self-confidence, what are their aims, what are their aspirations, or what are the values that they stand for. Then going on to building their interpersonal skills, where they're able to negotiate gender-based discrimination, about not marrying early, not being discriminated, sending them to school, giving them opportunity to be mobile, maybe accessing higher education, and so on and so forth. So because the family is the most critical space where a lot of the backlash happens. So providing the adolescents with a voice and skills to negotiate that space with the parents. And the third was at a societal level, because adolescence is a space where they're neither children nor adults. So they're in this, mid space where they don't get the rights of an adult of completely taking their own decisions, being on their own. That they're conveniently thrown around. Whenever it's convenient for adults, they're treated as children, and whenever it's not convenient, they're treated as adults. So we wanted to establish adolescence as a specific age where they could not just have a say in their own lives, in their family's decision making, but also have a say in the social space. So whether it is their own schools, whether it is the panchayats, whether it is the community around where they're coming from, we provided structured spaces for them where they could practice all the learnings they had done in the program into real life situations. So after this program, life skills was the running theme, and the gender lens was the running theme in all of this. And after a 2-year intervention, we did, end line, and we did kind of go back to them after 2.5 years again. And even after 2.5 years, it was found that there were significant changes in terms of their knowledge, certainly, but also in terms of attitude and behavior. So there was clear changes in terms of, aspiration levels going up, wanting for further education, thinking of that women could work and take up that space, increase in mobility to not just to school, but also to marketplace, to health facilities, to other spaces, increase in leisure time, which is so not thought of, and it is so critical for a young person and for women in particular, because they work 24/7. And also in terms of boys, thinking that domestic chores is not just for girls, but how they can contribute to the entire process. So after this was tried and tested, we kind of scaled up the model to Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, and Jharkhand and other areas with some 200,000 adolescents in all of these schools, in both in school and in community. And the results there were similar. We had NRMC doing the evaluation for us, and there was a clear case of significant change in the age of marriage by at least 2.5 years in Bihar and Jharkhand in the intervention sites. So we had tried and tested the model. We had scaled up into our intervention areas, and we felt that it was time to not just scale up as Breakthrough as an NGO independently or in partnership with other NGOs, but it was time for a systemic change. So we collaborated with Punjab government, with the Department of Education, and it's a tri-party MOU between Breakthrough, Punjab government, and JPAL. And interestingly, the program is very similar to what we had done earlier, but it has been adapted for Punjab. And instead of a separate curriculum, it has been integrated into their regular syllabus. So whether they're learning English, social studies, or moral science, the gender lens is cutting through all of these subjects, and additional chapters have been created, or the gender lens has been created into that. And there will be tests and all of that which will happen. And there's the master trainers who are teachers within the school system. Some 28,000 teachers will be trained to scale up this entire intervention across 4,800 schools, reaching around 6.5 lakh students in the next 3 years. So this was like, one of the intervention areas that I'm only talking about one. We've done many because I think there were some key learnings in this specific things. So one was, investing in the program design. So whenever you're starting a gender program or a gender equity program, you need to invest time, energy, research into the design of the program. You need to think of the end goal in mind. It really, and so short-term programs really don't work all that much. You need to have long-term kind of strategies in place. It helps to have a model built. So like what we tried and tested in like 18,000 students, the model was developed, and using that model, use it for scale and reaching out to more people. I think that really helped. The curriculum per se has to be, whether it is children or adults, I think it really helps to have a very simple, scalable kind of a model, which can be replicated easily. Also, the curriculum has to be context specific. So if you're going from state to state, depending on what the state focuses, the underlying thematic can be gender and rights, but you can focus on, say, early marriage in Bihar, Jharkhand, or you can focus on gender bias selection in Haryana, and so on and so forth. Also, the adaptability is key. Like in COVID times, we did all the trainings online instead of physical training. So more and more, I think online trainings is going to be a big thing, and it has to be a combination of using media, arts and culture, using popular culture to talk about rights-based work. And also, I think we have to increasingly start with self-use kind of, use apps, use new media strategies to kind of reach young people more and more. So besides the physical training, the digital aspect of it is also critical. I think you need to really invest in the training of facilitators, because if they are not converted, then no matter how much you say, it reflects on the training. So people have to live what they talk about. So following up, having local facilitators, training them is critical. Invest in research, monitoring, and evaluation, because that is what will throw up evidence, and that is what will help you know whether you're going in the right direction. It always helps to get permission from the top authorities if you're wanting to do a program in big scale. So whether it is, at the political level. Also, I think partnerships. So as an organization, you may not have all the skills. So can you kind of come together and partner with us? So for example, in the tri-party partnership, the government was the scale-up partner, Breakthrough was the technical partner on gender, and JPAL was doing the research and evaluation, which they're good at. So how do you bring win-win partnerships? And last and most important of all is, no matter what you're doing, you need to kind of work at multiple levels. So even if it is like creating that gender lens, you need to work with the individual by providing gender training, but you also need to work with the institutional level, whether they're practicing those gender inputs. So whether it is, what the ma'am said about having employees that are equitable, whether you have policies in place which is gender sensitive. Are you also working with the larger community to kind of sensitize them, and at the societal level? So Breakthrough follows the socio-ecological model, and I'll be happy to share more about the model and the details. But the time has run out, and I'd like to share a couple of things which I would have loved to show, but I think you can see at your own.
We've also shared a lot of your reports on the chat. You can also put them on the chat, not an issue.
Sure.
Thanks so much, Sunita. Thank you so much. Sunita brought out such an important point. We've been talking about the gender lens of the trainer and gender lens, but she says, so when do you begin? So they have decided to begin young and talking to boys. Thank you so much, Sunita. Thanks. And after this, I would like to actually bring in Hemlata here before we go on to Fawzia. Hemlata is the Senior Technical Specialist at ICRW, and ICRW does a lot of work with men and boys, especially on unlearning patriarchy, addressing gender discrimination and gender-based violence. So Sunita, Hemlata, after listening to Sunita and listening to the others, very quickly in about 6 minutes, could you share with us some of the approaches which can be leveraged to engage with men and boys and capacitate them at scale to promote gender justice, sensitivity, and equality from your experience in ICRW? And of course, whatever reports you have, you can share them with us and we will share with all the participants. Thank you, Hemlata. Over to you. Are you here? You have to,
Yeah. So thank you so much, Nandita. Good evening, everyone. And I'm glad to be part of this conversation today to mark the 40 years of Priya's work on ground, so which is making landmark transformational changes to further human development. So congratulations, Priya. I will be talking today about the engagement, our engagement with men and boys on masculinities to promote gender justice and equality. So this is today's conversation is based on the experience of several programs of ICRW, where we engaged with gender transformative approaches for educating boys and men, and of which trainings on gender and masculinities were a core component. So when we started the process for engaging boys and men on gender and masculinities, the very first question they confront for themselves is, what do I gain from gender equality? So while for many of us, this question itself may be outrageous, since gender equality is not a choice, but it's a non-negotiable human right. However, in order to reach this larger messaging, we needed to start by responding to the needs of boys and men and answer these doubts for them to onboard them. So at ICRW, we've had a lot of interventions in the past, which included young boys as well as men. So of which gender equity movement in schools is one, which is now also being implemented with boys in Rajasthan. Earlier, it was being implemented across Maharashtra, in Jharkhand, Vietnam, and Bangladesh, both with boys and girls. Then we had Parivartan, coaching men into boys, which was a sports-based program. So learnings from all these programs brought us, to this understanding that working on engaging men and boys cannot be done without the intersectional masculinities lens. I think most of us have been focusing on the issue of intersectionalities to be cross-cutting and needs to be the spine of all the work on gender equality. So at the design stage itself of the training that we designed for men and boys, or for the education, any education program as part of these interventions for engaging men and boys. So we tried, we started by unpacking the constructs of masculinities with them. So it is important to talk to men and boys in a language that takes into account their everyday behaviors and perceptions and social expectations from them as a boy or a man. And definitely these includes then discussions on the social pressures they face coming from the patriarchal setup, the kind of norms, social norms there are, or the entitlements, and the kind of privileges that they get if they adhere to the gender norms, which are expected from them. So while they may gain certain privileges, it is also important to mention to them that they may also lose a lot of things in the way, which is having dignity and love in relationships or health related outcomes for them. So these are some of the things in the daily course of their life that they encounter. We bring it to the fore. So also like talking on the masculine concepts, like deconstructing them, that why do certain boys opt for resolving conflicts through expression of anger or aggression, but many other boys may not do that. And for girls itself, like it may not be an option at all. Then the issues like normalization of gender-based violence, both the perpetration as well as experience, because it is a socially expected as well masculine behavior that, okay, boys are strong, so you can beat them, or boys need to fight back to protect their dignity. So all these issues need to be discussed with the boys in the very, or the men in a very basic day-to-day language. So for capacity building approaches to be effective, that is the focus of what we need to talk about today. We understand that we need to begin by analyzing the situation and creating a dissonance. That is the first step. So once the dissonance is created, personalized journeys of the men and boys or any participants, these trajectories will follow, and these will be different trajectories. And over the years of engaging with boys and men, we realize that beginning the discussions with the social construct of gender, it often gives the boys and men an impression that we are pitching men versus women, whereas it is a joint initiative against the patriarchal mindset. So here, in order to break this kind of a stalemate, the need for bringing human rights as the very first language or the very first concept was very important. So talking within the framework of human rights, it also gives space to boys, men, or people of any gender to connect with the issue of violation of rights within their own lives. So that is the first pitch that we start with. And then going on to talk about gender inequality. So when we say gender and equality, these concepts are important. So it also puts men on the defensive, even boys initially, because they feel it is going to be yet another lecture to them, and where they will again be seen as perpetrators. Now to approach, the approach here we took to work on these aspects is to start talking to them about self, which is themselves, instead of gender first. So what seems more effective is it is easier to make space for change with boys and men when they start talking. They bring out their perceptions and fears. So once anyone starts talking, it is easier to take them on that journey to challenge the norms that they are reflecting about, or to challenge the status quo. And therefore, it doesn't stop only at the trainings, as many of our panelists here have said. We need to make a space, continued space for discussion beyond these trainings as well. So, where they at least they start seeing themselves as part of the solution and stop propagating the negative views. So they should not see themselves also as part of the problem. And even if they are not able to practice the positive behaviors themselves, they should at least be able to, they should at least not propagate the negative views. So, these are some of the steps in the journey that men and boys do take. So the change, we all know, doesn't come at one go. Another is we need to build,
to cut you off. I'm so sorry. But just half a minute more for you to wrap up. Sorry.
Sure. So I'll just emphasize on a couple of more points. One is that men ask a lot of questions around data. So where is the data to support that we need gender equality, or there is violence? So therefore, in the gender trainings, along with sharing the concepts, it is very helpful to also share the data, the most relevant data on those issues, that helps them to reflect at the magnitude or the prevalence of the issue. And finally, whatever we talk around masculinities or why men need to engage on gender equality, we may ask them to empathize with women that, okay, violence against women is wrong and you need to stop it. However, we realize that they will say yes, politically correct things in the training, but when you give a positive spin to it, like their aspirations for a better relationship, better communication, happy environment for children, and finding resonance, these things largely work. So while we talk to them about their privileges, their power, and the entitlements, it is also very important to bring in the training or the programs the need for accountability from their sides of holding these privileges and using the power with the people of all genders to bring a change in their own lives. So privileges definitely do need accountability, and that is one big part of masculinities that we need to address. So thank you so much for sharing space and with me today to talk on this issue. And apologies for not being able to share the presentation, but I'll request you to please share it with all the participants here. I'll be glad. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hemanta. Thank you so much. Wonderful approaches that she has shared. She talked about she said men ask about data. So along with concepts, have your data. The first language of your training is important. Bring a human rights approach. Do not talk about socialization processes to begin with. Very interesting. We will share the presentation with you. I was going to bring in Fauzia, but Mona is having some internet issues. She's traveled great distance to come to a network zone so she could connect with us. Mona is in rural Nepal currently. So Mona, I want to quickly bring you in. Mona Sherpa is the Assistant Country Director for CARE Nepal. She's here with us today, and she's going to reflect on what we have heard today and talking about how do we deepen the impacts of gender training, and what is the landscape on gender like in Nepal, and how does one in the South Asia region deepen the impact. So over to you, Mona.
Thank you, Nandita. This is so funny. It looks like some sort of power is working on me, or like here at Lahan, for me to not allow share my experiences and learning or whatever, But thank you very much. And congratulations to Priya for your 40 years in mission. Great work. And also to organizers, for having this amazing reflective sort of session, Before I start, I would like to remember my guru, my mentor, my mother, my sister, my friend, I don't know what, Kamala Basin. Very recently, she left us. But then I feel like she's within us, living with us through our teachings, through her, the love that she shared with us. It's very important for me to share about her, when I'm talking about gender training and all. Because she really helped me to shape the fire that was there within me. It was blazing, but didn't know, what to do with that fire. It was just there. And she was the one who, helped me to give that fire a right course. She taught me how to fuel it in a right way. And at the same time, there was so much of anger in me, seeing all the discrimination, but also facing it in my life from the very childhood. There was so much of anger, but then through her teachings, she helped me to calm my anger, but also channelize it in a right way so that it turns into a power, the power of love that she always speaks of. But at the same time, she taught me what it feels and why it is important to connect, to build the sisterhood, to connect with women's movement and channel that fire that is there in me, through her teachings in the movement, so that there is a larger contribution that I can do from my own life, but also help others to connect, importance of learning, the continuous learning, reflection, but also as a trainer and as somebody who works in with movement in development world as an activist, why it is so important to break or portray the things which are presented in a complex manner in a very simplified way so that everybody understands. And as a gender trainer, as a development worker, as an activist, those are the things that I've learned from her. And I feel like that is the great, the greater lessons that I have also gathered, by running different gender trainings, but also seeing all those different trainings that has happened in Nepal and beyond, in Asia Pacific and in South Asian level also. I have mostly been part of Sangat training. Sangat is a South Asian feminist network, and as a core group, I take sessions in month-long gender trainings. But at the same time, as somebody who is engaged with care, I also help my team to design trainings, impart those trainings, or also development work, collaborating with our partners, the social movement, civil society organizations, local government, different actors, different stakeholders, even women's group, So those are the things that we have done. And then in all those trainings, something that I always make sure of is since training, most of the time, the trainings, generally also, but also the gender training, if we see why we are doing it, we say okay, leadership building, second line of leadership, grooming someone, grooming young feminists, grooming, women from the self-help group, or the saving and credit groups, or these mother groups, or men who should be supporting women, which is obnoxious, I would say, rather than changing themselves. Or impart knowledge, conceptual clarity, to share information, legal information, conceptual information, movement related information, and all those things. So these are the major objectives largely shared when we talk of gender training. However, for me, when I think of any training, and especially the gender training, I feel like there should be a political anchor to it, because this is not any training. This is a training which is actually talking about the structural discrimination that is there, which is talking about the power relation that is there, that is talking about unlearning those patriarchal privileges related benefit that we have enjoyed, but at the same time the patriarchal discrimination that we have faced, and how to tackle with that, being accountable, being responsible, but also being activist towards it, being attacking it also, and those are the things which are very political agenda. This is not how to collect money and then put it in a cooperative. It is not so. It's beyond that. So many times, when we do gender training, we forget about this political dimension which is attached to it, and then make it a very regular, capacity building kind of thing. I'm sick and tired of this capacity building word, actually, because it's largely widely used in Nepal. I don't know how it is in other parts of South Asia, but very much used in Nepal. So that cognitive advancement, where we impart right kind of knowledge, we work on the right kind of attitude, belief, the political dimension, but along with that skills, and packaging it in a right way so that the participant or whoever is taking that training is able to explore more, able to connect, able to realize, internalize, and as Kamla was also doing, channelize the fire that is there within you to the right course, linking it to the various collective actions, not just individually working on it, because we know individually we might be we will be able to do small changes, but then for the systemic kind of changes, of course, that collectivism, that collective action is very much required. So these gender trainings should also help us to connect with the movement, to the sisterhood, to the civil society organization, the Social Justice Act, understanding that patriarchy doesn't function in a silo. It itself is a very dangerous bomb-like thing, but also it becomes even more dangerous when it is supported by the state, when it is enhanced by the family member, sometimes somebody that you love, actually somebody that you trust upon, put your life on, try to be vulnerable on, and at the same time, how patriarchy actually, also joins hand together with capitalism, with fundamentalism, with militarism, and becomes even more super bomb, dangerous, conspiring. And then if our gender training actually doesn't hit on those aspects and just tells like what is gender, what is patriarchy, what is gender role, and all those manifested aspect of the life, then I would say those kind of gender trainings are not required. But unfortunately, I do see largely these days, probably also because it is very much NGOized, or probably because there are no right kind of trainers to impart this kind of political dimension through the gender training. It becomes very superficial, use these tools and do this, use that tool and do that, and then forget that political aspect which I was mentioning earlier, building that agency. My friend from Japan was also mentioning of that, building that agency, helping them to build relation with others, and then collectively, bring change in the system, which is the structure. So those kind of effort in a very reflective manner, pausing, learning, connecting, and moving ahead. If we do not do that, then it's better not to do those kind of trainings, is the harsh and the bold commitment, or the comment that I would like to give. So as I also tossed earlier, many times when we see gender trainings, I see more of the emphasis on knowledge and attitude is focused, however, not on skills. Yeah, so that's why many times, though we understand the conceptual part of the gender, we do not know, we get confused how to put that in a right kind of action. And for us to put anything into the right kind of actions, right kind of skills are also equally important. So that's why when we design gender training, it is very important that we club it all together, package it in the right way, with the right kind of methodology. Let the entry point be the practical life story, not just la 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 la, but then let it be the story of a Sita Chaudhary who is living it, and then the participant can also link themselves with that, relate with it, and then bring out their experiences. And then the trainer has to be someone who is not just academician or theorist, but I think Yogesh Bhai was also mentioning that whole amalgamation of the practitioner and the theorist who has lived it, who has experienced it, and out of that, that blended knowledge imparting thing happens in the gender training, and that's must. And many times, which I also mentioned in Sangat, there are gender trainers from those eras, and they have been consistently giving gender training, repeating the same thing without changing their content as per the context, and then their whole gender spectrum just speaks of men and women, but not LGBTIQ+, and the intersectionality and the other aspects which are required. So the trainer or the resource person who is giving this gender training also needs to continuously reflect and see how the person can transform themselves to build these content in the training itself, how to put it in the design process, the methodology itself. Yeah. So those are the things that the trainer has to be very careful of. The other thing which is very important for the gender training,
last minute,
is also the space. You cannot have a classroom kind of lecturist kind of training, but then the space where people feel comfortable to share, the cry, laugh, connect. And for that reason, what kind of space you are in while giving this training, that is also equally important. So when we are talking of all the bigger things, it's important to reflect on it, but also the very basic things of the gender trainings are also equally important. And if we do not take care of it, then it will be just like, just one example, like how it turns up is very recently I was in one session as an observer, and this trainer was it was a leadership training for the young feminist group. And this trainer was just sharing off those memes, the statements in the memes, and was telling women, don't spread your legs, spread your wings. And then when you listen to it, it sounds so good, oh my God, this is really empowering. Oh my God, spread your wings. But then when you think of it, the whole agenda of women's rights, the whole agenda of gender, the SRHR, it also talks about spreading your legs, not just wings. Having that sexual autonomy and bodily integrity, which is the politics. But then when you are saying spread your wings, it might sound very interesting. However, you lose on the politics of the content which is required in these gender trainings. I know there are so many things that I would like to share and all, which I couldn't cover. But then the main thing that I would say is, don't forget the politics. Don't forget to connect with the movement. Don't forget to build that collective action. And then let it be something which helps you to internalize it and then live it in your life, practice it, act upon it, so that it doesn't become something that you just gobble at this point of time, and then tomorrow when you ask, you forget about it and you don't know why you were spending that money, why you are spending that time, and it's useless. Yeah, so these are the things that I've learned, and that's why I'm not going to do that in all my trainings that I'm going to do in coming days. But also, while working with my team, I'm going to repeat this again and again. Thank you very much.
My team is busily making actions behind me, so I'll have to ask you. You're such a powerhouse, Mona. It is such a privilege to hear you speak, and I'm going to call you again to have a longer discussion with you. I don't have to repeat anything that you said. So relevant, so relevant. Come from the experience of the participants sitting there. Thank you so much, Mona. Big hugs.
My pleasure.
Big hugs to you. I want to invite quickly Fauzia from Pakistan. Fauzia, gender training, like what Mona was talking about, you present it in that way, you design it in that way, you talk about gender relations, you talk about challenging gender relations, and then particularly in male-headed organizations, there might be a danger of possible backlash. So how can we support women within organizations to challenge and question this gender injustice? So Fauzia, over to you. Fauzia is a social activist and thought leader on women's rights and empowerment, and has led several gender trainings, very, very well known in South Asia. Thank you so much, Fauzia. In spite of a medical appointment, she's here with us. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Nandita. Nothing could have kept me away from this gathering of allies, which I need from time to time. I wanted to say hi to everyone on the video, but because of connectivity issues, I'm going to switch off my video and continue my conversation. So hi, everyone from Pakistan. Great to see you. Now I'm switching off my video, and Nandita, I hope you can share my presentation, please. Thank you.
Sure.
Before I go on, I just wanted to share a bit of my background, and I guess that is going to reflect in what I have to speak about today. I have the first slide, please. So I have worked for many years in the communities, but also in the government. And so much and such pertinent points have been made in the presentations before me about working in the communities, gender trainings in the communities, that I feel like my coming at almost the end of this session is not a disadvantage. In fact, it's a strength, because I'm going to speak mainly from my experiences and takeaways from training with public officials, gender sensitivity trainings with public officials. Of course, also in my interactions with communities, because a bulk of my experience has been, apart from working with communities, has also been working with public officials, heading one of the provincial commissions on the status of women in Pakistan, the Punjab Commission. I have come across experiences which I felt are enriching. Anyway, so if you could share my presentation, please. My first slide that in my first slide, I talk about gender mainstreaming and where are we at? The next one, please.
So,
where are we at?
So there's a little bit of a tech problem. So if you can just read out from your presentation, we will share it on the chat, but we are trying to get it from another platform.
No worries. I can just share my experiences. I don't need it, but I thought for the benefit of the participants. So what I was saying was that I wanted to find out for myself, and specific to Pakistan, where are we at in terms of gender mainstreaming? And even from a policymaker's perspective, I realized that we are very far away from mainstreaming gender in our policies, programs, trainings, beyond the rhetoric that Mona was talking about, and this is true, unfortunately, not just of the government, but also non-government organizations. And I'm really happy Mona covered that so well, exactly my feelings, that you'll see also in subsequent slides, that there is a lot of rhetoric going on in now civil society trainings also. And I feel like that is a clear put off, but I'll come to that later. I just wanted to share the fact that we are far away from the gender mainstreaming that we talk about. And while we have the need for mainstreaming women's needs and considerations in growth policies, in our national as well as in the provincial growth policies, in our economic 5-year plans, and now development schemes also increasingly, they are lip service generally, and they don't go beyond that. Hence, when a training program has also been factored into our policies and interventions, it is really for box checking and not really about that underlying societal, the gender relations change that we talk about when we talk about gender training. This also is seen as a job of women, whether they are in the government or out of it. It has never been seen in the government, at least, as a job of men also. It is seen as a job of NGOs. As a matter of fact, if I can share my personal experience, heading the Commission on the Status of Women of a province which has 105 million people, whenever I would call high-level government functionaries about capacity building, or even generally talking about women's issues, they would be very courteous. And at the end of the conversation, they would always say, "Ma'am, which NGO are you from?" And it took me a few meetings to help them understand it is a statutory body, it is a government organization, it's not an NGO. But believe me, even now, I'm sure after 6 years of working in that capacity in the government, people don't know. It is also seen as the domain of women's machineries, which is the women's development departments or commissions or ombudspersons. The mainstreaming that we are talking about is very far away, from what we want. Often, gender trainings, when they happen, they are per force. International obligations to begin with, especially when happen, I'm talking specifically now of the government, because, having to report on CDOR, having to report on, in Pakistan's case, the generalized system of preferences in terms of trade. We have a GSP plus preferential trade status in trade. So we have to report on 27 treaties and conventions, 7 of which are human rights related, and many of those relate to women's problems and women's issues. So when we are asked, or when there is receptivity in terms of training, giving training or getting training, it's by force as an international obligation, and they really can't do it. But the good news is that on the supply side, as we call it, or on the government side, there is the concept of gender trainings or gender sensitivity trainings, whether per force or for any other reasons, it is catching on. And as I speak, I am a part of a very large province-wide training of all the principals of public sector colleges, each and every one of the principals of every public sector college. Fortunately, Zoom has made it possible, and MS Teams, as well as assistant professors who are getting their promotion exam on to becoming associate professors as well. So there is that opportunity. Similarly, there was an earlier opportunity on training the nikah registrars. For those of you who are familiar with the Muslim family law, Muslim marriages are generally registered by the nikah registrar, and then it is taken to the Union Council for the formal registration. But the first interaction with the public official is, or the first point of contact is the nikah registrar. The nikah registrars in Pakistan are usually men, and they are religious figures. So having been a part of 26,000 nikah registrars training and having led that training, I can tell you it's a very, very difficult job because there you see patriarchy and male privilege naked, absolutely. There you see the role of, or the political use of religion, because that's where, when you're told that, that's when you're told that, but our religion permits marrying off a girl at puberty. Why are you invoking 16 years, minimum years of marriage for girls? And by the way, it's 18 for boys. So there is a disparity at least in one of the provinces. So there is, that's where I learned to be very strategic, very, very strategic. And I feel that goes for even for civil society, because what they're doing is we are using a one-size-fits-all method. We are using the same trainings, churning them out, covering various. Can we go to the next slide, please? Churning it out for various participants without understanding their needs. It is very frustrating for me, as even now I'm involved very closely with policy making. Very frustrating, because when you do get that opportunity, it's an expensive opportunity which doesn't come very frequently, and therefore when you're losing it, you're not doing the right thing. So you have to know your audience, as I said in my previous slide, that it is very important to understand what tools, what methodology, what pedagogical techniques are going to work with the grassroots, what are going to work with the mid-level management or senior level management, and what tools are going to work with the government, because believe me, they are going to be very different. I feel like I have been very lucky or successful in our trainings with the government or public officials and even the police. And I think it was purely because the content used language which was insider language. If we can go to the next, please, the next slide, please. So it used language which was insider language. It did not use rhetoric at all. It did not talk at times. We went through the entire trainings without talking about gender, without talking about patriarchy. Patriarchy, by the way, is a big no when you're dealing with the government, because they shut off immediately, and then they say, oh, this is NGO agenda, this is a donor-driven agenda or foreign agenda. And sometimes, the very, very pernicious sort of intentions are attributed to it also. But anyway, so that's what I mean, that with the government, definitely avoid rhetoric. With the communities, give them the tools to hold the government accountable that we talked about earlier. Because often we give them these highfalutin concepts, but we don't help them operationalize those concepts. I can talk a little bit about that more, but the slide that you have in front of you is a strategy. This is the 3 A's model that I have found very, very helpful. One is the authority, especially when you're dealing with public sector trainings and public sector change. And that means that you should have the authorization of the highest level if you are going to make this training a part of the larger strategy for change. And I guess that is the point that I should have made upfront. Trainings cannot be a standalone initiative. If you're getting an opportunity to do a standalone initiative or undertake a standalone initiative, forget it. Don't bother. You're wasting money and you're wasting a very, very significant opportunity. Make sure it is a part of a larger authorization for change when it comes to women's empowerment. The policy makers are on board. All the decision makers are on board with it. They don't have to buy into it completely, but the person who's attending the training should know that I have some level of buy-in from the decision makers. Acceptance. I know that time is, I'm sure, Nandita, running out. But
gesticulating wildly.
So quickly, acceptance, use language, use tools which will increase your receptivity, as I said earlier. And ability. Ability relates to both sides. Ability of the participants, what level are they at? Will they understand the concepts in the language that you have used or not? Ability of the trainer, can they on the fly bring their level down or up, judging from the level of interest of the participants. And I think we can move to my literally almost the last slide. Yes. Quickly, customization I've talked about. Context, I want to, within customization, I want to focus on the context. Know the nature and the social and political context in which each organization works. For example, sometimes people want to do something, but their context is such that they're not quite ready for the community or it is with the government. Make sure that you understand that. And And please adapt your conversation while you're training. Sometimes your time will be cut, especially when dealing with decision makers, from 5 hours to 2 hours. Make sure that you know how to do it. And finally, I feel like, please do not forget that this is only it's a part of your larger plan. If it's a small, if it's the plan, not gonna work. Thank you so much. And I think I've run out of time, Nandita.
Yes. Thank you so much,
Okay.
Fauziya. Thank you so much for this. I'm so sorry. We've just gone over and above, but there's so much to learn from each other and the emotions and all of that. I cannot stop anybody. I just want to bring on Sarojini here. Ms. Sarojini Ganju Thakur is the chairperson of Institute of Social Studies Trust. But most importantly, taking forward what Fauziya just talked about, she is the founder of the National Gender Center at Lal Bahadur Shastri National Academy of Administration. She is a retired IAS officer herself and has been instrumental in mainstreaming gender training in the academy. Welcome, Sarojini ji. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Nandita. And first of all, congratulations to Priya on this very, I would say, momentous occasion of being there for 40 years. The hat I wear as chairperson of ISST is really not the hat which has brought me so much into contact with gender training. It's, as you said, much more in a different capacity that I was working with the government, and that's where we set up the National Gender Center. Now, a lot of the issues that Fauziya actually highlighted, I would say actually find themselves true in India as well. We did set up a National Gender Center. We have a National Gender Center. It's located in the Civil Service College at Mussoorie. And it actually has been, I would say, 25 years. And fortuitously, it was actually formed the same year by coincidence, really, as the Beijing conference. So that actually gave it momentum and gave actually a push to its establishment as a gender studies unit. Having said that, there was a momentum. You know how government institutions go through ups and downs. And at that particular stage, actually, I think the academy, the Civil Service College, was actually blazing a trail, because the kind of course that we used to run met a lot of the kind of concerns that people talked about. There were states involved. It was a long course. It was sort of involved not only government officials, it had NGOs, and it actually was a 6-week course where you did some training. Modules were developed which were context specific for various states, and then it was sort of replicated, etc. Now that created the nucleus for the National Gender Center, that we started working with state training institutes, because we have, saying, and it set a kind of model where it was then decided, and thanks to the then director, that there would be 2 aspects of work for the National Gender Training Center. One, and I go back, because though we are using the word, I'm using the word mainstreaming, it's not really in that sense, but at least what had happened earlier at the Civil Service College was sporadic lectures, occasionally on gender awareness, not in a sort of, not in the context of power relations, etc. But what happened post the development of the National Gender Center, it became mandatory for every course in the Civil Service College to have some amount of, I won't say gender training, I don't think it made such a difference, but at least it opened the windows of understanding to professionals, and people could take it further. And this was done at various stages through the training of civil servants. But what was equally important, and I think more important, was that there was a conscious effort to build a model of a multiplier effect. And the multiplier effect was that you don't choose atomized individuals, from various states, etc. You choose people who actually have support from their senior officers, who are recognized to be trainers and then can use a cascading model to do training. So it's very interesting. The states which we worked with, and I did a review much later in 2012, the states which we worked with at that time, the people who were trained actually set up gender units in their state training academies, etc. But that was only a small, it didn't cover all the states. But those units actually, I would say, operated or were functional within those states for several, for 20, 30 years, and they still are fairly strong. That model was replicated. I heard, the gentleman from Samarthan, Sri Yogesh Kumar, talking. We recently, what we've done there, and I sort of coordinated the course, was again a cascading model where there were trainers from the state institutes of rural development who were given gender training, who were then taking it back and who were supposed to influence the whole process of Gram Panchayat development training. Again, selected states, because India is huge. So that is one model that was being used. The second thing was issues. Can't cover everything. So whatever is sort of a big issue, and there was a stage where, the declining sex ratio, which is shocking, is the main issue. So they would call all the district magistrates from the states where that took place. So there has been this effort to focus on, Panchayati Raj, gender budgeting, etc. But it's never enough. It's just sporadic. And I feel that is perhaps, it's just a small dent. Now, the question is, who do you train? Of course, the people who are officer trainees, that's one category. But the other thing that is key, I feel, in trying to build capacity is the people you train. There has to be some commitment. There have to be people. There has to be ownership of the department who sends those people for training. Otherwise, it just is sort of a cry in the wilderness. It makes absolutely no difference. So apart from that, there's also a conscious effort to develop training resources which could be disseminated throughout the country. For instance, recently I've been involved through the center in writing a training manual for gender responsive governance or on sexual harassment, and it's then disseminated to all the public officials. That is one aspect of the nature of training, but I would like to talk a little bit more generally about some of the issues. It's existed. The problem with gender training, not the problem, I would say where the gender training in the academy moved away from what was done in the past was that it started talking about power relations. But most of the gender training in the public sector is located in institutions which actually focus very much on skill and knowledge building. So this concept of the kind of feminist pedagogy that we want to use, which is participatory and which is experiential, etc., requires a body of very skilled trainers. And we just do not have enough. And there's no stability in the number of trainers. So you find the same people repeating themselves. So that is one very big thing, problem, I would say, in dealing with the public space, But the second issue that I would say is that I have over the years come to the conclusion we are not going to be able to change everyone's attitudes. There isn't enough time, and the state on the whole is quite patriarchal. So now we need to be able to distinguish between those people who are innovators, who are people who are yes men, who just say yes, and then others who just actually are part of a resistant lot. So what I think is that it's very important to be able to realize that you're not going to be able to, and focus on some of the on some of the technical aspects which have to do with analyzing interventions, telling people how to design gender sensitive interventions, look at the whole issue of project design. So I see that time is running out. And so I would just say that there's a lot more to be done. And actually, there needs to be a lot more investment, I would say, in terms of human resource, in terms of funding, if we really want to bring about a systematic change and influence the whole way things are done. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Sarojini, for sharing your thoughts with us. I would like to call on our next speaker. We are privileged to have the founder and creative director of Agents of Ishq, Paromita Vora, with us today. Agents of Ishq does fascinating work on love, sex, and desire. Welcome, Paromita. The floor is yours. I'm so sorry we kept you waiting.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. So, hi everybody, and congratulations to Priya for their 40th anniversary. It was great to hear everybody speaking. A lot of things that people said resonated a lot. And Agents of Ishq, the project that I'm going to talk about, in some ways responds to some of the questions that were raised. I would say, like, one of the things that came out, the idea that a one-size-fits-all kind of training happens, or the idea that we're continuously trying to scale things up, but then when you scale up, it has to be very simplified and very cookie cutter, and that's not actually very helpful in changing things like attitudes, because they sit at the intersection of so many different things. So Agents of Ishq began in 2015 with a desire to kind of talk about sexuality on the internet, because the internet had become a space where people were going to talk, not only to look for information on SRHR, but also for pornography, also for dating, also for all information on sexuality. And it was also becoming the locus of a lot of public conversations about sexuality and the absence of sex education in schools. But it was happening in a kind of elite and somewhat casteist seeming way, a classist seeming way, which on the one hand was full of these feministish, as we call them, slogans of, spread your wings, you can do anything you want, but then was always privileging the fragility of the elite woman, so to speak. So Agents of Ishq was created with the desire to have a different kind of project about sexuality and to create a different conversation about sexuality, which would be inclusive. And I guess the question for us when we're talking about unlearning patriarchy becomes that if we change our starting point in the story, what will change at the center? If we do not use patriarchy as our starting point, but we use feminism as our starting point, can we build a completely different kind of project or a different kind of intervention? And I think that the most important thing about feminism is that it talks about structures, it talks about changing forms. But often we find that the kind of initiatives that are around gender only talk about changing content without changing the form in which we do things. So it becomes very difficult actually to address things at a very deep-rooted level. We found in the early years that some of the young people who came on to help us do our work often thought that to speak for women meant automatically to speak against men, to critique them, to use the catchphrase toxic masculinity, which actually created tremendous polarization in every room we went into. So we wanted to build a project that was not a laundry list of politically correct ideas, that would be deep, that would be discursive, and that would be open-ended, which of course very terrorizing for funders, but it was something we really believed in. And we believe that if we're going to talk about a pleasure positive, and we say pleasure positive, not sex positive at Agents of Ishq, because we don't want to define for people what their personal intimate journeys should be like. I mean, today we are talking about a different realm of many genders and many sexualities. And I think to be the most inclusive we can to all the possibilities that yet await us, the idea of pleasure is a very capacious kind of frame for building this project. And we felt that it should be a very pleasurable project in itself, that people cannot be expected to talk about pleasure in this kind of point form training methodology, but rather they should be able to enter a pleasurable space where they feel comfortable to talk about pleasure. And so this is how Agents of Ishq was built. This was the landing page of our site when we first started. It doesn't look like this anymore, but very handmade, very desi, and basically saying you can come in here for honest conversations and beautiful, cool media. It is a project that imagines itself as changing the culture and conversations in the public domain. Because we believe pleasure is an inclusive frame which lets everybody enter on their own terms. Everybody can talk about pleasure. You don't have to have a pre-existing knowledge. And if material is pleasurable, then it could talk about heteronormativity in beautiful, funny, and relatable ways. And it could also talk about things like sexting, not only in terms of being safe, but how do you sext well? How do you do it pleasurably? So always combining what people desire as well as what they need to think about in order to be safe and to have positive journeys in their intimate lives. The project also took on a very integrated approach. It doesn't atomize sexuality, rights, health. It doesn't atomize body, mind, heart, emotion, desire. All of these things are one. So, for example, without vulnerability, there is no revolution. Actually, it talks about the idea of vulnerability inside us as well as outside us, and the idea of interdependence as people. So it joins the emotional and political. I hope that you all can go and see the graphic of 100 things in my body on our website, because we actually did put up an outline of the body in the office, and for 1 month, people just wrote all the things that are in their body. And that went from caste to hurt, to desire, to sex, to history, to beauty. So the idea that we are integrated beings, that intersectionality is of political identity, but it's also of the self. And if we don't integrate the self, how can we hope to talk about integrating society in a way? I think the most important thing that we have found helpful in working at Agents of Ishq is people began contributing their narratives. We did not solicit this, but it happened on its own when the project started, and we started building on it. And the project centers the experiences of women and queer people. It never explicitly discouraged men, but it explicitly encouraged the accounts of women and queer people. And because they were at the center of the storytelling, actually we architected together a completely different language about sexuality and desire. And I would say it allowed us to be far ahead of where the mainstream is, because people were really sharing their own experiences, and their experiences were not being automatically sorted out into good, bad, and ugly, but rather were just in one plane as personal experiences with reflection. They may be of pleasure, they may be of difficulty, they may be of exploration and experimentation. Our belief is that people are the experts on their own lives. So in fact, we don't carry any cultural commentary, opinion pieces, which is the kind of thing that you often see on many other online sites, where it's about stating your position and berating the patriarchy and kind of passing an opinion on the culture, but not really reflecting on your own life and your own, how you are a part of the culture. As time has gone by, we have about, 300 or 400 accounts of people on the site. And I think what it does do through shared storytelling, we have co-created a new and shared community wisdom. Every time a new article comes out of somebody's life, other people contribute. So I can see that, in a way, it builds on the very old consciousness raising model, where actually women come or people come and they contribute their narratives and they begin to understand the structure. But they also do it in a positive way. They begin to learn from new structures that people are already creating. So it's not that we're taking a linear journey that first you'll unmake the old structure, then we'll talk about the new structure, but rather people are speaking about chosen families, people are speaking about their mental health journeys. And so the person who is still unpacking the patriarchy is on the same page as a person who is living a completely queer existence. And they're both in a strange way learning from each other. So I think that creates a community wisdom. And that creates a non-linearity and non-hierarchical idea of politics, where every human being learns something from their particular experience. There is no mandated destination, but rather everybody finding their own journey and somehow being able to act on it is the idea of liberation. So we call it a kind of dynamic agency where people can keep thinking about what works for them. After 3 or 4 years of doing Agents of Ishq, we began to have men enter the conversation. I think the really important thing about it was that they entered on the terms of the women and queer people who had created the space, rather than on some predetermined terms, because otherwise you do find in other spaces that men want to come and tell you how you should be talking about something. But here a more reflective kind of conversation began to emerge because men realized that this is a space where they could go for this. I think it also allowed a kind of safe sense of, yes, as a man, I can think about what it means to be a man without feeling accused or without feeling I have to conform to some idealized notion of a restructured man. We also began to do sex ed workshops, which were mixed. And we feel it created a wonderful space for empathy and mutual learning across genders. And we found those workshops to be very positive and have a quick kind of uptake on thinking about gender, your own and other people's, and friendship and creating the idea of friendship. I know that I'm almost out of time, so I want to say just one last thing, and I'm going to let you watch 1 minute of a song because I think you should also have some fun out of the presentation. But I think we've done a lot of cutting edge work on consent, for example, because the first thing that we made about consent expanded the idea from yes and no to the maybe of consent, creating a lot more space for people's own agency in trying to determine what they want from a relationship. I'm happy to say that we really think we informed and influenced the mainstream discussion on consent, because you might have noticed that today the dating app Tinder put out a big ad in the Bombay Times saying consent means yes equal to yes. And we have done some work with them in the past. So we feel that the work of organizations like ours that are working online but trying to bridge the mainstream and the feminist alternative are actually able to impact the thinking around this. So I will end with this little clip.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Paromita, and for your time. And I'm so sorry for making you wait, but there was so much to hear from all of us. Most important is at least we got together on the same platform. Thank you. Thank you. I want to now bring in the last speaker, very, very important in this whole conversation. We've talked about changing our starting point on gender training. We've talked about safe space for communications, for conversations within the trainings. We've talked about unpacking patriarchy. We talked about consent. I want to bring in Nazaria and Ritambara, who is the co-founder of Nazaria, to talk to us about gender trainings, changing language of gender trainings now, and what do you see and how do you see gender trainings panning out? Are you here, Ritambara? Oh, there you are. I'm so sorry for making you wait. Just unmute yourself. I'm really bad in timekeeping. I'm just too emotionally invested in this. Sorry.
That's absolutely fine. Thanks for inviting us, and congratulations, Priya, for completing 40 years. We complete 7 at the end of this month, and we are already tired. Nazaria is a Delhi-based queer feminist resource group. We work with queer women and trans persons. The group is led and run by people from the LGBT community. And the reason why we started the organization and the reason why we continue to do the kind of work that we do is because somewhere we feel our lived realities or the kind of issues that we want to talk about are somehow missing from the discourse. I wish I could show the slides, but I just want to make 4 quick points. Of course, gender is a social construct when we talk about gender, but gender is But when we look at gender from a queer feminist lens, gender is also about being assigned a certain gender at birth. For example, congratulations, it's a boy, congratulations, it's a girl. But we often do not, in our gender trainings, talk about people with intersex variations, where we are not able to assign a particular gender at birth, where we are not able to, based on their genitalia, we are not able to box them in a particular binary, for example, or we conduct surgeries on young babies, for example, or we are able to assign a particular gender, but when they grow up, they do not conform to that trajectory. We know of people who've been assigned a particular gender at birth, or they've been assigned male at birth, but they menstruate, for example. So this is one aspect that we don't often talk about. Gender is also about gender norms, for example, what we were discussing earlier, right? Gender norms, girls should be a certain way, boys should be a certain way. Girls should not spread their legs, for example, what Mona was talking about. What Azad Foundation is also challenging, right? That girls should be able to drive. Gender is about gender expression that we don't often talk about. How I express my gender through my clothes, through my hair, through my shoes, so on and so forth. Gender is about how other people read my gender. we often talk about, I'm using a little bit of Hindi, how we talk about ye aurat kitni mardana hai, for example, this woman is so masculine, this man is so feminine, for instance. So gender is about all of these things. And only one person initially in the conversation spoke about the third gender, for example, and we should be using the word transgender, for instance. There is this whole thing about gender identity that we don't often talk about, for instance, because when we talk about third gender, then who's the first gender, who's the second gender, for instance? There are people who do not identify with the gender that was assigned to them at birth, for instance. There are trans women, there are trans men, and that's a reality that we are living in. So if in our gender trainings we don't talk about gender identity, then we are missing out on a lot of people who do not feel comfortable with the gender that they were assigned at birth, for instance. I was assigned the gender female at birth and I identify as a woman, for instance. There are people, trans men. A trans man is a man who was assigned gender female at birth but identifies themselves as a man, for instance. So these are the kind of realities that we need to take into account. These are the kind of realities that we often miss out on. So that's one particular point that when you look at gender from a queer feminist lens, that you often tend to recognize. Gender is about, I wish one could show a picture. Gender is about this woman in London called Harnaam Kaur, who lives with a beard, for example, and she identifies herself as a woman. There is a man called Ivan, who's a trans man and who gave birth to a child, and there are numerous pictures online that he's breastfeeding his own baby. I was muted, and which brings me to the second point, that often we talk about that gender is biological and sex is biological and gender is a social construct. If you look at sex from a queer feminist lens, you'll also realize that sex is also socially constructed. When you look at it from a queer feminist lens, sex is also socially constructed, because when you take into account realities of people with intersex variations, when you look at realities of a Harnaam Kaur, when you look at realities of an Ivan, who's a trans man who gave birth to a baby, you also realize that bodies are so dynamic. There are women who do not menstruate. There are men whose voice does not change when they reach adolescence. So bodies are also so dynamic. Bodies are so different. Men and women are not fixed categories. These bodies don't just exist in isolation. They don't just exist in binaries, in these boxes. So if you look at sex from a queer feminist lens, you'll realize that sex is also a social construct. Third point that I want to make is, we often talk about transgressing gender norms. Often gender trainings are about women should spread their wings, women should transgress social norms. Queer feminism also teaches us that it is okay to stick to gender norms. It is okay that women do care work, because looking at realities, looking at lived realities of trans people also teaches us it is absolutely fine to stick to certain gender norms as well. So it's absolutely okay. So we transgress certain gender norms, but we also stick to certain gender norms, and it is absolutely okay to do that. Fourth point is, we cannot, queer feminism also teaches us we cannot not talk about sexuality when we talk about gender, because they're intrinsically linked to each other. We have to talk about pleasure. We have to talk about desires, because it often is a part of the kind of gender norms that dictate our society. As women, we often do not talk about sexuality. Often we are not supposed to talk about sexuality. We are not supposed to spread our legs. I'm sorry, I'm using that example over and over again. But as women, we are not supposed to do A, B, and C. We are not supposed to do PQR. We are not supposed to do XYZ. And it is very important to talk about these things. Often sexuality is denied to a lot of people. Often sexuality and desire is denied to people with disability. So we cannot not talk about sexuality and talk about gender. So sexuality is an intrinsic part of a gender training. Sexuality is an intrinsic part of any gender discourse. Plus, when we talk about gender-based violence, when we talk about violence against women, sexuality is an important part of it, because a lot of violence that happens on women because of their gender, sexuality becomes an important part of it. So these were some, I don't want to take a lot of time, but these were like 3-4 important aspects that I wanted to talk about, that gender is not just about being a social construct. It's about multiple things, gender identity being very important. Sex is also a social construct. It is okay to conform to certain gender norms, and we cannot talk about gender without talking about sexuality, because for a lot of us, our sexuality has been denied, especially in case of women, especially in case of LGBT people. And a lot of violence, a lot of gender-based violence, sexuality is an important part of it. A lot of bodily violations are done when it comes to gender-based violence. And thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Tambara. Big hugs to you for staying with us till the end. Thank you so much. Sorry for making you wait. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for all the participants who stayed and all the panelists for your time. And before I hand over to Rajesh Bhai and to Abhilasha to close, I don't know what sense everybody else is getting, but the sense that I got was there is so much work to be done. So much work to be done, and this conversation was timely, it was needed, and it is time that all of us collaborate, work together, and really looking at all the points that have come out, wonderful points that everybody has shared. I think Ritambara towards the end summed it up. When we really talk about gender training today, what are we really saying? So over to you, Rajesh Bhai and Abhilasha. Rajesh Bhai is founder president of Priya. Abhilasha is with UN Women, representing UN Women India. I welcome Dr. Tandon, and I welcome Abhilasha to give us the closing address and some key takeaways from the session today. A lot of emotions, a lot of thoughts, a lot of experiences, a lot of food for thought. So over to both of you. I would like it to be like a conversation between the two of you while we close. Thank you so much.
Abhilasha, go ahead.
Thank you so much. And firstly, I would just like to congratulate Priya for their journey of 40 years. I mean, it's a great achievement, and so much of work on ground. And Priya and UN Women have a long-standing partnership, and even currently for the UN Trust Fund on Ending Violence Against Women and Girls. I'm pleased to be here as part of the discussion today. So the discussions have been very rich, and I've been given a very tough task to try and summarize these. But I'm going to try my best, and I'll try to highlight some of the learnings that I've had from the day, and also from UN Women's experiences of gender training. So I am not in a very good network area. But in case you are unable to hear me, so Nandita, if I can just request you to point that out. So I think of all the conversations, of all the great sharings and learnings of that have been shared today, I think the first overall theme was about methodology and the critical need of using feminist pedagogy during gender trainings, and because that is central to gender transformation. And I think we also need to, there were speakers who spoke about the need to invert our thinking, especially in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, and how that going forward we see training to be in more of a hybrid way, where we're also having in-person trainings, but largely online trainings. So how then do we actually, retain this essence of gender training? Because what we have learned is that every person is a teacher and also a learner. So how do you facilitate that experiential learning online as well? there were speakers who spoke about, planting the seed of reflection in the gender training. So how do you do that online as well and facilitate that exchange? So that is something that we need to think about and also invest in. And we've also been doing a lot of trainings in the past 2 years during the pandemic. We also have to be mindful of the digital gender divide and the access and ownership of internet and digital resources that women have. We need to develop high quality technological tools, leverage them, and also invest in this area. So that was one point. The other second, I think what speakers also spoke about is to have a cadre of trainers. And I'd just like to borrow from what Mona said, is that those who live it in their lives, how do we have those powerful trainers who can then undertake gender transformative training? So that was another theme. And how do we continuously build that and also have the younger generation as trainers and reach out to men, women, girls, boys, and other genders. I think the third point that was very validly made by speakers was about distinguishing between training and orientation. So, often gender training gets restricted to like a 2-hour or a 3-hour module, and that's what we term as gender mainstreaming across sectors. But we need to move beyond, and like Fauzia also said, that it cannot be a standalone initiative. It needs to be sustained, and it needs to be, broader and into the work that we do on a daily basis. That was the third point that I wanted to make. And the fourth, I think, is was talked about is monitoring. And I would like to especially stress on this, that, we need to link the trainings to the learning outcomes. So how do we know that the training is being applied, especially when we talk about duty bearers? So there have to be mechanisms in place to understand, monitor the training outcomes better. And lastly, and I know that we're running out of time and everybody's been waiting and also want to hear Rajesh Bhai. The fifth point that I'd like to make is that patriarchy doesn't exist alone in the system of oppression. So the gender training must therefore address how caste, class, race, ethnicity, sexuality, and gender identity intersect with patriarchy. And that is beautifully spoken about by Ritamra and Paramita as well. But, how we undo our own internalized patriarchal conditioning, it's complex, and therefore we need to have consider that all these intersections are therefore addressed. I'll stop there. Thank you so much for including me in this conversation, and my best wishes from UN Women to the entire team of Priya and all those who were part of this discussion today.
Thank you, Abhilasha. You have made my job very easy because you covered a lot of very important points. There is no point in trying to summarize this wonderful, multifaceted, passionate conversation. Building on what you just said, I began to realize certain trends over the 40 years that I have been witnessing. As our speakers today made it clear that our understanding of gender relations and gender identities has become more complex, more nuanced, more, I would say, enriched, and therefore more reflective of the reality on the ground. But perhaps and this has moved over the last 40 years. It wasn't so clear when I was younger and started this. So on the one hand, our understanding of gender realities, gender relations, gender identities has become more complex, more nuanced, more related to the ground. The trajectory of gender training has become more sanitized, more limited, more classroom-based, more, a few concepts thrown in a 2-hour session and checklist. Because in the earlier days, gender-related sensitization, awareness raising used to happen on camps, on the streets. I remember with, great passion, the Women's Day rallies of 1980s, and those rallies were opportunities to learn and to connect. And now even those of us who do rallies or go to rallies, they have become more like talk shows, they're not really opportunity. So, the type of opportunity to learn, reflect was much more diverse, much more spontaneous, much more emotive in the earlier days, and has become more narrowly structured, designed, packaged, and therefore delivered. In my view, what I have heard today has reinforced my faith in the momentum that this region has, and hopefully the whole world has, about transforming unequal relations of power between genders, but also providing space, safe space for conversations about that to happen. Whether it is a digital space, whether it is a camp, whether it is a shibir, whether it is a workshop, or whether it is even a walking tour or a rally, the importance of that. And these are such relations that they cannot be taken outside the context of life and living. We can learn other skills and other concepts, of planning, on budgeting, on development, etc. outside the life. Potentially we can learn, but understanding gender and becoming an agent of change in your own everyday life to begin with is a everyday business for everybody. It cannot be just limited. And what I like about today is that this spaced out, if I may use that phrase, spaced out way of dealing with this question of asking question about unequal relations of power, discrimination, exclusion is happening in everyday life, in everyday forms of whether it is agents of ishq, or whether it is workshops, or whether it is training. And I think this opportunity, this moment is a moment for us, those who are sort of more formally organized around promoting gender-based understanding or gender equality, that we should trigger such opportunities wherever we find spark and add support, add fuel, so to speak, so that it bubbles further. The link between resistance in everyday life to oppressive forms of gender relations and structured learning and rallies on the street. These three stages, forms, opportunities for learning need to be reconnected. I think somehow we have lost the link, and we need to bring it back and make a focus on gender issues, gender relations, learning about gender, both an everyday life, a skilled profession, and a movement on the ground with rallies and protest marches. So thank you all. Wonderful. Thank you, Nandita, and your team, my colleagues, for doing all this. It's been a longer session than we had planned, but then that's the way life is. So thank you all. Thank you.
Big thank you to all the panelists for staying connected till the end, and the audience for interacting with us and listening to us. And as a young feminist myself and working in this field for the first time, there is so much to take away from today's conversation. So I hope that this conversation gets carried forward like it deserves to be, like Nandita said. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining.